I'd been driving for most of my adult life, but none of those miles prepared me for a winter night when everything you think you know about being alone gets rewritten in an instant. The divorce papers said it all in black and white. Final 3 weeks before the story I'd built was over, and the holidays after felt like a long freight of silence. Trucking had always been my refuge. Moving, listening to the tires, letting the road take the shape of my thoughts. But grief and insomnia compress evenings into sharp little points. I matched with someone on an app that weekend more for company than anything else. A way to push back at the emptiness. I didn't expect chemistry. I expected conversation, a warm meal, a few hours that might make the next shift feel bearable. It didn't go that way. Pittsburgh's South Side and a heavy snowfall felt like a postcard gone wrong. We had coffee and small talk and a polite parting. Her laugh didn't land with me. Neither did her plans. I left before midnight because I couldn't sit with the way the house felt like a stranger's. I chose the shortcut because maps sometimes lie for the better. County Road 17, a slurry of old pavement through trees, patches of no cell service, the kind of road that trims your options down to keep going or keep going. I saw her at roughly 12:15 a.m., and God, she looked out of place even before the blood. She stood barefoot in the lane, jeans shredded, temple plastered crimson. A single steel handcuff clung to her wrist like an answered prayer that had closed on the wrong hand. She raised both hands when my headlights found her, fingers trembling. I killed the engine and sat, my breath fogging the glass. "Please," she said when I stepped out. Her voice was small, high with cold and something raw, fear, maybe grief. "They'll find me if you leave me." My mind flashed every caution I'd ever learned. Don't let strangers in the cab. Don't stop in the middle of nowhere. But the sound of someone breaking in the dark carries a weight I can't unhear. She sagged as if her knees had lost interest. I grabbed the door and pulled her in before she could convince herself otherwise. She kept scanning the trees, fingers tapping the vinyl like she could push the danger away. "Drive," she whispered. Don't stop." I wanted to call the cops before we'd gone 2 miles, but County Road 17 is one of those places where your phone is a useless pebble. The snow made the world flat and quiet. Headlights looked like tiny moons. I pushed the speed up more than I wanted to. 80 felt reckless on ice, but staying felt worse. She clung to the coat rack, whispering that they tracked phones, that they used receivers, that they would see license plates. She sounded like someone who'd been taught to be watched. We finally limped into Red Hollow, a 24-hour station that seemed to exist solely to flicker for drivers' exhausted eyes. The attendant had the kind of face that practices hospitality like a muscle. Polite, distant. I tried the dispatch number and heard the dispatcher's voice trail off about an outage. Transformer problems up the line. The woman's panic rose like a tide. "If they see your truck, run," she said, and before I could reach for her, she bolted out the back door into an impossibly white wall of trees. There's a small logic to the minutes that follow. An SUV slides into the lot like it was carved out of night. Dark paint. 2 men who take up space in a way that reads practiced. One leans out and asks about a girl. His voice is casual, but the look in his eyes isn't. He lingers on the trailer's reflective stripes like someone who reads codes instead of faces. I lie. I say I haven't seen anyone. I point to the road and the weather like a shield. The men drive off only when another vehicle pulls in, as if crowd is safety. I spend the night gripping the wheel in a motel parking lot, replaying the cold look she gave me, a mix of pleading and pure animal survival. The police come the next morning. They're professional, kind, but their answers have the hollow of someone trying to build a bridge out of fog. They pull the security footage, and I watch the lot in black and white, her stumble, the bolt for the trees, the SUV stop, the men scanning. A detective uses the phrase mobile trafficking unit, with more caution than conviction, then tells me they found tracks leading into the wood, but no indication she'd made it out. He mentions a GPS mount in the SUV, Hardware that shouldn't belong on a civilian dashboard. Military-style receivers. He tells me they're checking federal lists. He promises to call if anything turns up. They never do. Days blur into weeks. I keep my roots winter dry and headlight bright. I fill my tank earlier than necessary and choose truck stops with cameras and clerks who make eye contact. Nights, though, are the worst. At certain intersections, under certain streetlights, I see flashes of white in my rearview mirror, lengths of fabric, a bare foot, the hollow catch of someone who didn't find a way out. Maybe it's the way my brain stitches daylight over the memory. Maybe it's nothing more than exhaustion and dread. But the memory of her, the raw, urgent look when she asked me not to leave, sits like a stone in my chest. A couple of days after Red Hollow, detectives call again. They're quieter. We tracked the SUV to a known watch list, one officer says. We pulled a few plates. We've got people looking. That's the official line. There's also the unofficial one, the one you get when you hear the cadence in a cop's voice. Hope is small, and work is vast. After that, nothing. The case goes latent. The world spins. I still drive. Sometimes I imagine different endings. I imagine her wrapped in a thermal blanket at a hospital, furious and warm and far from those men. I imagine her disappearing into the trees toward a farmhouse and a pair of hands that aren't the ones that put cuffs on her. I imagine the worst, too. The kind of ending that settles cold and unanswerable in the back of your skull. None of those imaginings rest when I wake. They only multiply. People tell me to let it go. You did what you could, they say, not unkindly. Maybe they're right. Maybe the moral center of all of it is as mundane as filling your tank before dark and locking your doors. But the moral I carry isn't just about prudence. It's about the small decision that can become your defining moment. Say yes or say no. I said yes that night because being small and human felt heavier than being cautious. Saying yes is messy and hopeful and sometimes dangerous, but I learned that not saying yes can eat at you just as surely. If anything, her look taught me that people on the edges don't come with neat instructions. They come with urgent, broken pieces of story that can't be legislated into safety. The road keeps giving me back the past in the rear view, flickers that make me check my mirrors even when there's nothing there. I still drive winter routes, and my headlight beams have a way of finding the spaces where the world looks most generous to strangers and most willing to hide them. I don't tell myself heroic stories. I tell myself to keep my eyes open, to call when I can, to refuse to let a single night blur into a precedent for silence. Small acts of compassion matter, but so does preparation. Help when you can, wisely, and refuse to let a single choice be the weight that defines the rest of your life. I learned early that trucks keep their own kind of memory. A dented fender remembers a winter that winded you. A cracked taillight remembers a night when headlights vanished into snow. I was 24 the first time the road taught me to be careful. 2 months before the pickup at the farmhouse, my brakes froze on the iron range. Stupid, simple thing. A hairline crack in a line, ice that built faster than the heater could melt it. I slid off the shoulder and spent 4 hours wrapped in my jacket with a space blanket and a thermos someone left me. I watched semis pass with drivers who couldn't see me and felt the cold move like a fist inside my ribs. That night, I vowed I wouldn't be caught unprepared again. Work was steady enough. The depot in Duluth kept us running through freight season, but winter squeezes everyone tight. Fewer drivers, later loads, pressure to make runs no matter what. When the dispatcher called me at midnight on a frigid January night and said, "Ethan, we need a last-minute drop at mile marker 61. I heard in his voice the thinness companies get when payroll is tight. I tried to refuse. I told him about the brake scare, the hours I'd spent brushing snow off my mirrors until I couldn't tell which side of the road I was on. He told me layoffs were on the table if we didn't cover routes. The decision wasn't mine. I took the run. The highway out of Duluth was a ribbon of black glass under my headlights, and by the time I left the interstate, the trees were close enough that the beams made tunnels in the night. My radio puttered with static and a talk show that sounded like ghosts. The GPS flashed a road that had never been on any map I'd used. I felt that old familiar prickle. Work, tiredness, that small stupid part of me that thinks something else will happen this time. I told myself it was superstition, the same way old fishermen swear by tides. Mile marker 61 was past a stretch of county road most locals avoided after dark. The farmhouse came up out of the dark like a thing half buried. Windows iced over, porch sagging, a barn leaning like a man too tired to stand. The lane to the house was lined with mailboxes, some empty, some rusted shut. I could hear a clanging noise behind the barn, metallic and staccato, like chains striking metal. My phone showed no bars. I told myself to get the paperwork, sign, leave. I pulled the trailer close to the porch, grabbed the clipboard, and stepped out. Snow compressed under my boots with that hollow sound. I shouldn't have been nervous. This was routine work, but the farm felt wrong in the way empty places sometimes do, like a room that still remembers whoever left. I rang the bell and backed toward the truck so I could keep an eye on the rig. The door didn't open. I rang again. Nothing. Then the noise from behind the barn changed. Voices, 3 of them, low and quick like a script they'd practiced. My breath fogged and hung in the air. One step closer, and they exploded out from behind the barn like they'd been waiting in shadows. Before I could take my second breath, they were on me. God, the surprise. Hand over my mouth, then down into snow, the cold stealing the breath from me. One of them yanked my keys. Another ripped the trailer door wide enough to shove pallets like they were empty. The third one barked in a voice that smelled of menace and whiskey. "Forget the load. Take the rig." I gave a shout, more reflex than hope, and they were already moving, kicking at the snow, sliding into my cab and peeling away. The truck fishtailed under the streetlights, then disappeared down the road like it belonged to night. I lay there, a red smear on my eyebrow, and the world a tight, distant thing. I tried to stand, legs like rubber, and stumbled toward the highway lights. The numbness in my fingers was obvious. The desperate heat in my gut was louder. I walked until headlights found me. A county patrol car slowed and a cop leaned out. "You all right, son?" he asked. My voice sounded small as I told him. "Stolen. Truck gone." He radioed in, and later they found evidence in the barn. Shredded manifest, another pallet, tire tracks that didn't match anything on the ledger. It wasn't the kind of theft that happened once. They found my rig 2 states over days later. Burned out cigarette butts, VIN plates scratched clean, cargo gone. The depot scrubbed the security footage stat, but a lot of rural yards don't keep cameras, and the ones that do point them where the owner wants them pointed. No faces matched prints, no local witnesses could place anyone near the farm at the right time. The sheriff's office asked questions with tired eyes. "These guys move in packs," one deputy told me quietly. "Professional opportunists. They watch routes. They know what rigs are worth on a back road." I swallowed hard. It made a grim kind of sense. The barn had been bait, a pallet, a fake address, the right kind of cold loneliness to make a driver stop and be alone. I went back to work because the bills didn't stop when your license was gone. Nights on the road became a map of micro decisions: where to stop, where to park, whether to take the well-lit truck stop or the cheaper, darker lot. I started filling up earlier, calling dispatch to reassign me if the drop was rural, refusing runs that smelled like traps. My coworkers noticed. "You look different," my buddy Marco said one shift, loading straps over his shoulder. "Like you got mud under your skin." I laughed it off, but I felt it. The way the memory of those 3 men sat in my chest every time I passed a farmhouse. I'd catch myself scanning silhouettes in snow, counting voices behind porches, checking mirrors for headlights that shouldn't be there. The first winter after it happened, I avoided rural runs. I took overnight work in the city, the kind with apartment complexes and diner-lit lots. I thought distance would cure it, that the world would prove orderly again, but trauma doesn't keep appointments. One night, coming back from a late drop, I passed a farmhouse with a collapsed barn and a mailbox sagging like a tired man. My hands tightened on the wheel without my permission. For a second, the world contracted, the night folding into a memory so sharp I could taste the cold. I slowed without meaning to. The radio played static under a midnight DJ. I drove past, breath held, and the world opened again. There was no one behind that barn, no footprints in the snow, just the same lonely hush I used to think romantic. I pulled into the truck stop and sat with coffee that had gone cold. The soberness of it was simple. We all share the road, and sometimes the road shares back its worst. The depot paid a settlement for the rig. They replaced the load insurance, offered counseling on paper, patched the paperwork and the legal forms. That didn't stitch the nights back together. The lesson sat quiet and blunt. Caution is a living thing. Mercy and bravado are luxuries you trade when your life is on four wheels. I still help people when I can. There's a difference between reckless kindness and smart assistance. But I no longer trust the hush of a back road at night. I check for cameras. I call the numbers on delivery slips. I park in the light. And I never leave my phone out of reach. Those three men taught me that some people learn to hunt by reading the routes others take. They taught me to read the road right back. Kindness on the road is necessary, but it must be guided by vigilance. Small precautions and clear procedures save lives more often than unguarded instincts. I used to think winter made everything neat. Snow covers the mistakes, the world goes quieter, and miles of highway feel like a clean sheet you can write anything on. For a while that was true. I ran refrigerated freight because I liked the solitude, the steady hum of the engine, the way a rig gives you rules and room at the same time. The cab becomes a small, honest life. Coffee, CB chatter, a playlist that knows the turns of your mind better than anyone. But that winter the rules felt thin. My mom was in the hospital in Wyoming. My bills were 2 months behind. The holidays were a reminder of how small I'd let my world shrink. So I kept driving, thinking miles would buy me space to breathe. The storm came on December 23rd like it always does in Montana, sudden and diplomatic. 1 minute the sky was flat iron, the next it was a switch of white so heavy you had to squint at it to remember where the road ended. I pulled off at Horseshoe Ridge truck stop because the advisory said visibility would go south, and because the coffee there is decent and the place had a heat lamp, you can sit under and pretend for a little while that the world is being warmed for you personally. I stepped out, stretched the kink out of my shoulders, and saw him. A pale man standing behind the building, hood up, face inked by the truck stop's sodium lights. He was just watching, not doing anything obvious, but watching the way a man watches a photograph he wants to memorize. "Can I help you, buddy?" I called, because it felt like the polite thing to do, and because sometimes people want directions or a warm cigarette. He didn't answer. He took one step back and melted into shadow. I told myself later I only noticed him because I was already on edge. The injection of worry is tiny and quick. You shrug, climb back into your cab, tell yourself you're tired, and keep rolling. I got back on I-90 with a full tank and a truckload of lettuce and apples wrapped in ice, and the storm put its hand on the windshield like a promise. The highway pinwheeled white. I could barely see the reflectors at first, and then little by little my mirrors began playing tricks. A glint here, a shadow there. I blamed it on reflectors, on a semi's cat eyes. But one glint kept pace with me. It was a car, lights off, keeping the same distance whether I sped or slowed. You learn to ignore things that don't make sense. You keep on. But you test the rules too. I merged. The car matched me. I slowed. It matched me. For miles it shadowed me like an obedient ghost before sliding back into snowfall and disappearing. Around 3:40 a.m., halfway between nowhere and where my mother was, I pulled into a Forest Service rest area, a place I'd used in summers to nap, in winters to wait out lake winds that would tumble into the road. It was a loneliness that truckers know. The rest area sits against a stand of trees that look like stakes in the dark. I killed the engine, wrapped myself in a thermal blanket, and let sleep pull my eyelids low. Fatigue has a soft edge. It pulls you over before you realize teeth are grinding your jaw. A soft, steady tap woke me. Tap, tap, tap. Not on the hood. Not a gust against metal. A rhythm measured against the truck like someone checking to see if the vehicle was real. When I opened my eyes, there was a face at my side window. Eyes huge and unblinking, breath fogging the glass, fingers finding the handle. Recognition is a physical thing. I didn't have to force my memory to him. It hit me like a brick. The man from Horseshoe Ridge, the one who had stood behind the building and watched me as if trying to remember the exact way my ears stick out. He was so close now, his eyelids made a dark rim over the whites of his eyes. The hairs in my neck prickled, and a man who has driven through isolated nights his whole life feels something cold and primitive. This is danger. I banged my fist on the window and shouted, "Get the hell away from my truck!" He jerked and stumbled back as if he'd been caught mid-act. In the exact second he stepped away, a car rolled quietly from behind my trailer, like it had been waiting there all along. Lights off, engine idling low. I thought it was a trick of sleep. I thought it was the cold. Then I reached for my CB and grabbed the microphone so hard my knuckles hurt. T9, this is Heavy 23. Need state troopers to Forest Service pullout. Mile marker 215. Guy trying doors. Repeat, someone was trying my door, I said into the static. The troopers rolled in under 10 minutes, tires whispering against packed snow. They found prints around my rig, loops of footprints pressed into the glowing white. They traced a pattern. Pacing, waiting, approaching. It looked like stalking. The officers asked me question after question, their breath fogging like cigarette smoke in the beam of their flashlights. I gave them my watch time, the place, the way his fingers felt on the handle through the glass. It's a small factual thing. 2 hours, a couple of pumps of hot coffee in the cab, a half hour of rest, and then the human part takes over, the part no one can measure. A detective contacted me a day later with information that made the back of my neck go cold in a different way. There had been other cases in Montana and Idaho, similar patterns. Truckers followed, vehicles with lights off, men pacing around rigs at rest areas. In one case, a driver disappeared. No real theft, no broken windows mostly. Just an intense, quiet attention. The detective looked like someone who had seen the weather of people's lives and knew a storm when it was near. Sometimes these guys don't want money, he said. Not as a clue, but as if he were explaining a kind of weather. Sometimes people just watch. The thing that burned at me more than the frostbite on my fingertips was how intimate his silence felt. He didn't take my wallet. He didn't steal my GPS or my CB. He stood at my truck like a question and tried the handle as if he were asking permission. The absence of purpose felt of a piece with the winter. There was no logic, only an insistence. Why does a person follow another for miles and try a handle and then move away? The detective didn't have answers. He had patterns, not motivations. Patterns are the map. Motivations are the weather you can't predict. I kept driving after that, but the truck doesn't take back what it teaches you. I sleep with the curtains cracked now, not to look out, but so something can't press its eyes against the glass and say, "Here I am." If I stop at a rest area, I park where a deputy could see me if he were to drive by. I keep my CB mic within reach and my doors deadlocked twice. Some things are habit and some things are armor. Both are small, stoic acts of survival. People ask if I was afraid. You live as a trucker and you carry fear like tools in a toolbox. They need to be there, but you don't want to use them. Yes, I was afraid the way you are when you see a car in a mirror and the driver isn't there when every rule you know says they should be. Afraid because the man looked at me the way someone looks at a photograph they want to keep for later, and because fear that has no reason is the worst kind. It sits in your rib cage and multiplies. It's been seasons since then. My mother got better enough to come home. The bills got shuffled and paid with too many compromises. I still drive. I still like winter because it erases things neatly. But the roads taught me a different lesson than that first clean map of miles. People can be weather too. They come at you without warning. Not all storms are about snow and wind. Some of them are about eyes pressed to glass and questions with no answers. Keeping your guard, but don't let fear make you small. Be prepared, trust your gut, and respect the distance roads give you. Sometimes the safest kindness is keeping moving.
I learned to sleep with one eye open the hard way. 6 years ago out in Wyoming, I woke to the sick scrape of a blade along trailer fabric and a shadow slipping through the gap like it belonged there. I fought until my hands bled and the cold mud swallowed my boots, and I kept the scars as proof that luck can run out fast on an empty highway. After that night, I started carrying a heavy metal flashlight under my seat and sleeping in 10-minute shifts, half dreaming with the cab light on. You get good at small rituals when the road does things to you, checking locks twice, parking under lights if there are any, making sure someone somewhere knows your load. Still, you never really get rid of the memory. It lives in your ribs, in the way your chest tightens when headlights sit at just the wrong distance behind you. That December run was supposed to be routine. Pharmaceuticals from here to there, flat rate, paperwork signed. Back before sunrise, Route 93 had turned into an ice ribbon that night. The desert wind cutting like a saw. I felt the truck under me the way a pilot feels a plane. Every micro swing, every tug, and that old animal part of me stayed on edge. Around 11:40, I noticed an SUV tailing me. It wasn't close enough to trigger the reflex honk, but it kept that same distance whether I picked up speed or slowed. Passing zones came and went, and it never pulled out. That's the kind of behavior that sets the hair on the back of your neck up straight. I muttered to myself, "Not tonight, please not tonight," and tried to imagine any benign explanation. Maybe some guy trying to keep pace, maybe a tourist. The nights have a way of telling you their own truths, though, through small things that don't comfort you. When I pulled into the rest area, it looked like the kind of place abandoned by luck. 2 busted vending machines sagged under a flickering lamppost, graffiti curling on concrete. The only warmth a thin orange spill from an industrial street lamp. The SUV slid in too and parked at the far edge, headlights dim, engine off. I went through the motions, rolled down, checked tire pressure, made a show of leaning into the wheel wells to seem busy. I locked the cab doors when I finished, climbed into the sleeper, and tried to nap because that's what drivers do. You steal what rest you can. 15 minutes later, the world hummed low and false. An animal noise, the static edge of sleep, and then crunching soft, measured, gravel giving under careful steps. I rolled over and peered out the side mirror. 2 figures crouched at the trailer doors, their heads close together, a muffled click-click like bolt cutters. Time split, then snapped. Instinct slammed me up and out of the bunk. I hit the horn with everything I had. One long, furious blast and lights stabbed the darkness. The intruders jumped like being caught in a spotlight and bolted for the road. The SUV eased in, headlights never on, and swallowed them up. The whole thing looked like choreography, timed, practiced, the way a pack rehearses its moves. I ran the perimeter of the trailer, flashlight swinging. The lock plate was pried, the seal bent out of place. Inside the trailer, the pharmaceutical crates were tossed but mostly intact. Whoever they were, they wanted whatever could be carried fast and sold faster. When the patrol arrived, they took notes like they take everything else. Careful, gray. "This is coordinated," one officer said, looking past me at the empty highway. "These crews ride for miles, follow rigs, wait for the window when the driver finally drops his guard." My voice sounded like someone else's when I told that story into his radio. Weeks after, the image of their coordination haunted me. Not just the bolt cutters, but the way the SUV stayed at a constant, patient distance, the way the 2 men moved like shadows whose timing synchronized with sleeping engines. I replayed little scenes over and over. The precise click of a tool, the muffled thud as one dropped it and ran. The cold that hit me when I realized how close they'd been before I woke. People kept telling me it was business. Thieves adapt to the routes and the season. Law enforcement stretched. Desperate men doing desperate jobs. It was facts presented like an explanation. But facts don't make your hands stop shaking when you check the locks at a truck stop at 3 in the morning. I finished the run. Insurance covered some of the paperwork. The depot put a lock on my load procedures, and there were memos about increased vigilance and reporting strange vehicles. That warm professionalism is useful until you see roadside cameras that don't catch what you remember, until you talk to other drivers in the diner who have their own late-night theft stories that sound like echoes of the same playbook. I traded routes for a while, mostly well-lit, urban deliveries, because anxiety makes good company with exhaustion. But avoiding certain roads is only a temporary fix. Hauling meat, or meds, or anything worth a cornerman's interest, the highway always finds you again. Sooner or later, the schedule sets you back on the place where you were vulnerable. Evenings after that night were different. I found myself checking the rear view like I waited for something to arrive, an SUV at a constant distance, shadowy in the wash of my taillights. I learned to park so that the cab faced the entrance, to back into lots whenever possible, to sleep with the keys within reach, and the flashlight in my hand like an extension of my palm. I told myself the rituals were rational. I told myself that preparation equals survival. That's true. But it's also true that the memory of people moving in the dark won't unteach your fear. There's a quiet humiliation to it, this idea that you, a man who's been behind steering wheels for years, can be unsettled by a pair of low-profile headlights and the sound of metal on metal in the night. You carry it anyway. A small, live thing. Not every strange driver is a threat. Humans are messy that way. Some are just tired, some are lost, some have bad maps and worse judgment, but the world isn't obligated to sort them for you. The worst lessons are the practical ones. Never assume distance equals safety. Never let the engine idle when someone's been watching. Never nap without the cab secured. And always keep a line of sight to your trailer seals if you can. I still help people. I still pull over for a stranded driver when the lot is lit and my gut says they're legit. But if I see a vehicle that follows like a shadow, I treat it like a bell at the edge of something dangerous. I stop earlier. I call dispatch. I park in public. The fear taught me protocols that feel clinical, and those protocols saved me from letting luck dictate how my night turned out. Months later, when the desert dark comes and route markers blur into black, I still flinch at the click of a muffled tool. I keep checking mirrors, and when a set of dim headlights sits too still behind me, I imagine the ghost of that SUV steering slow and patient down a ribbon of highway. You learn to live with the memory like an old bruise. You rub it and make it part of your movement. Driving freight is a ledger of small gambles. Time, speed, trust. The thieves that night gambled on me sleeping too long. I walked away, maybe luckier than I deserved. The moral of the highway, if there is one, vigilance is a muscle. You have to exercise it, or it atrophies. The road will remind you with teeth when you stop practicing. In a world where other people's choices can put you at risk, preparedness and cautious kindness matter. Protect yourself with practical safeguards, but don't let fear stop you from doing the right thing when it's safe to do so. I learned to read the road the way other kids learn their letters. My uncle taught me the cadence of an 18-wheeler, how the engine talks when a bearing's going, how the trailer hums when a load shifts. I grew up with grease under my fingernails and a thermos of coffee that never cooled. After 3 months of apprenticeship runs, the company let me take a light dry goods haul alone. It felt like a test I'd been waiting for my whole life, a chance to prove to my parents that I could be trusted, that I could make the decisions that come with being behind the wheel at night. I don't say I was cocky, just eager. The way you are at 18 when the map looks like promise instead of responsibility. It was December in Wyoming, and the wind had a habit of speaking in gusts that tore at the trailer's corners. Snow drifted, quick and ghost-like, collecting in the hollows of the highway. By 10, the radio sounded like static and the cab felt twice as wide and half as warm. Fuel light blinked. I pulled into Black Hollow because it was the only light for miles, because the map said so, because I didn't want to push on with what might be nothing more than paranoia. The market was empty, like the world had gone inside to avoid the cold. I was stretching when a man came up behind the pump's ragged coat, beard iced over, eyes like he'd been awake since yesterday and the day before. He pointed at the highway and spoke soft, like he was trying not to wake the sleeping lot. If you're taking the south exit, don't go the other way. Trust me, you don't want to meet what's down that road. I remember thinking then that his breath looked more like cloud than air. I laughed it off, nervous, because anyone who talks like that looks like they've seen the worst of something, but his eyes were steady, and something in his voice held a story that had cost him more than a warm coat. Son, that exit ain't lit for a reason. They cut the power on purpose. Then he was gone, back into the glow of the market like he'd never been there. I felt the warning stick to the back of my neck. I went back to the truck, with my toes cold, and scolded myself for being spooked. I had a route to make, miles to earn, and a schedule that didn't care about warnings or omens. I merged onto the highway and the world narrowed to headlights and white. A mile out the streetlights blinked off like someone had walked by and switched them all. Black swallowed the shoulders and the trees. It was the kind of dark that feels loud in the ears. And then, like a bad dream folding into waking life, a pickup sat crosswise in the lane, its running lights off, blocking everything. I slowed. Figures stepped out of the snowbanks, moving with a practiced calm. One tapped a bat against his palm. Another had a machete resting on his shoulder like it was part of him. There were more 10, 12 stepping from the drifted edges as if they'd been waiting on signal. My hands went cold on the wheel. This had the wrong shape to be random. It was a setup. I knew the feeling in my gut calibration from stories swapped at truck stops and the instincts my uncle drilled into me about never being surprised on the road. I threw the rig into reverse, tires slinging salt and snow, backing away with the rear of the trailer swinging wide. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. They chased the truck for a few yards, fists and metal scraping the trailer skin. I spun a reckless U when the road opened and floored it toward the market lights, like the thought of warmth was a magnet. The ambulance blue lights on the dashboard blended into the market's neon. Back at Black Hollow, I called 911 with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. The operator's voice was tight and kind, the promise of officers coming immediate and real. I waited in my cab with the heater on full, replaying the faces I'd seen, when the cold in my bones turned into suspicion. No squad car came, no callback. The night waited like a patient animal. The next day I went to the sheriff's office because that's what you do. Report it, get it in the system. The deputy I spoke with was a broad-shouldered man with the world in his eyes. He did his best, took my statement, made the polite noises a man in uniform makes to reassure a shaken kid. 2 weeks later, when I asked why no patrol had found them, his voice dropped and the smile left his face. That exit's been a problem a long time. They're gone when we get there. No trails. Almost like they know we're coming. Those words did something in me that rearranged the trucker superstition I'd grown up with. The man at the pump, maybe homeless, maybe a survivor of the ambush, had been right. I didn't sleep right for nights after. Every rumble of snow against the trailer sounded like footsteps. I started taking long detours at dusk, following maps like rituals. The job got heavier somehow. The rhythms that had soothed me suddenly seemed like thin protection against whatever waited in the cutoffs. Friends in the yard told stories. Some mentioned seeing rigs pulled from roads with doors open and no drivers, empty cups on the dash, the heater still blowing. Colleagues who'd rode the same westbound runs nodded at certain mile markers, their eyes going somewhere behind me when they said, "Don't take the south exit." I thought about the man with the beard. Maybe he'd lost something out there, maybe family or pride. Maybe he'd been one of the ones who had been caught, escaped, and come back forever changed. That's how lives break down on the long haul. One bad pull, one bad stopping place, and you can be rearranged in ways the maps don't show. Weeks turned to months. The road never stopped being a place where the ordinary became unpredictable. I learned to listen harder. The radio was never just noise. It was a weather vane of people's moods. I watched other drivers' faces in diners, what they left in their cups, the way their hands tightened on a fork when they told certain stories. I learned which truck stops had light that stayed on all night, and which ones housed silence like a living thing. Once, I found a man in the overnight lot who was staring at his hands like they'd betrayed him. He'd taken that same south exit once, he told me, on a run like any other. He'd rolled past a parked car and thought nothing of it until shapes filled his mirrors and a truck of men lit up in his rear view. He swore they'd caught him if someone with a shotgun hadn't fired a flare into the air, scattering them like birds. He showed me the scar on his forearm, 2 shallow lines from where a bat had nicked him, and then he laughed, a quick, brittle sound. "You learn the rules," he said. "You learn who to listen to. Sometimes a ragged man at a pump is the only textbook you get." Years passed and I kept driving, older than I felt and maybe a little softer at the edges. I still avoid that stretch, and I tell rookies what the man at Black Hollow told me, not to scare them, just to make sure they know the road is not neutral. It will give you 1,000 kinds of kindness and a few kinds of cruelty. The south exit is a scar on the map, a place where darkness can be organized and patient. Once, passing Wyoming at night, I slowed near a turnout and watched the sky open like a black mouth. The trucker's life is a ledger of small choices. You choose where to stop, which strangers to trust, what stories to believe. When the wind is screaming and the lights die, you choose to keep your lights on and your wits sharper. I tell the story now to remember that my life is not merely on the other side of a schedule. It is also what I chose when the lights went out. The road teaches you that caution is a form of care of yourself and the people who'd be worse off if you ignored what you were given to know. Trust the warnings you get from those who've already seen the worst. Your life can depend on a little humility and the willingness to listen. I learned to hate winter the night the rig slid off the mountain and never stopped hating it afterward. That night took my cousin, my co-driver, and a piece of myself. The ice took the rest. For 3 winters after, I treated every white line as a threat and every gust of wind as the memory of the trailer fishtailing beneath me. Still, life doesn't wait on grief. Bills pile, bosses call, and a man with a mortgage learns to put one foot back on the brake and the other on the gas. When the Salt Lake run came through musical gear, careful load, decent pay, I took it. The paycheck mattered. The road, even with its ghosts, was where I still earned my living. Echo Ridge shows up on my dashboard like a promise you don't want to make. I'd driven that pass 100 times, knew the switchbacks, the pullouts where snow chews at the shoulder and the fences that disappear under drifts. That night the storm had teeth. Winds licked my mirrors and the heater pushed hot, stale air into a cab that smelled of coffee and worn leather. The GPS, usually a steady hum of directions, froze and rebooted with something new. Exit 127, detour to primary road. I blinked at the screen and thought for a minute it was a construction reroute. I'm a man who trusts maps until they contradict what he knows with his bones. The sign itself looked fresh, edges catching my headlight. There were no cameras, no cones, just that gleaming slab and a narrow ramp curling down into trees. I told myself to obey it because the traffic alerts were spitting warnings about closures ahead. I told myself I wanted to stay safe. If I'm being honest, part of me also wanted to be in motion. Motion is how you drown out the replay of a wreck in your head. The detour wound down like someone had unspooled a ribbon through the woods. Cab lights threw cones across telephone poles bowed under snow. Old cabins stared like missing teeth, their roofs white. The lane squeezed to one, then narrower, until I felt small and foolish in the 2 tons of steel I drove. The road wasn't on any freight atlas I'd used for years. It curved where it shouldn't and rose where my experience told me it would fall. At a crossroads that shouldn't exist, someone stood in the middle of the fork, a figure with a brown parka too big for him, hood drawn, face lost in shadow. My first reaction was the company rule, don't pick up hitches. My second was practical. Who the hell walks in that? The wind shoved a handful of snow at him, and he didn't move. He looked like a man who had been standing there a long time. You shouldn't be here, he said when I lowered the window. His voice had a rasp I'd heard in cabins and hospitals, something worn by cold and time. Road circles back wrong. I can show you the way out. Part of me wanted to laugh the way you do to cover being scared. Instead, I asked the question the rule book forbids. Where you headed? He shrugged and pointed at a fork, then the other. Back to where I'm needed, he said. It was the kind of answer that clarified nothing. I let him in because I'm human, and because I wanted someone to be there with me on a night that felt like it was watching. He smelled faintly of antiseptic and a campfire someone tried to keep alive. He spoke little, mostly pointing left or right at intersections, as if he had memorized the pattern of the road. He knew the hairpin where a plow often missed the drift, and the rail where the shoulder gave way. He knew it like a man who'd walked the route when the maps were still paper. 20 minutes into his quiet, we arrive at another intersection that, in my head, doesn't exist. It's a place I should be able to draw with my eyes closed, and it isn't on the GPS, isn't in the atlas, doesn't match the terrain. He told me to stop, opened the door, and climbed out into the storm like a man returning to a cairn. You'll be fine now, he said. Others won't be, unless I reach them. Then he turned and vanished into the white like someone pulling a sheet over a lamp. I sat there, hands on the wheel, waiting for the headlights to find the familiar road. When they did, I was back on Route 70 like I'd never left. My GPS showed no detour, no exit 127. My trip log had no record of the winding miles I'd just driven. It was as if the road had never existed, and my memory was the only proof it had. Months later, I still feel that small, cold tug when a blizzard rolls in. The other drivers on the CB started passing around similar stories, static ghosts about ways that open and close in storms, a man who appears in a parka to point the lost back to safety. They call him different names in different lots: the guide, the walker, the old-timer who knows the road's heart. Some swear they saw him leading a stranded family to a plowed lane. Others say he's a memory, a survival trick, a collective hallucination born in white danger. For me, the man became a measure of something I couldn't name. Was he real? A man like any other with a reason to be out there? Was he someone who died in a slide long ago and learned to keep the living from following? I don't have a tidy answer. The rational part of me catalogs possibilities: prank, person with local knowledge, or bad wiring in a head, while another part keeps a place for that night on a shelf the world can't find. The winter after, at a diner off I-15, an older driver slid a coffee across and said, "Keep to the primary lanes when it kicks up. If you see a man pointing, don't argue, just follow." He didn't grin. He had that look of a man who'd seen the road hand out mercy and menace in the same breath. The more people told the story, the less it was mine and the more it belonged to the pass itself, an oral map for the foolish and the tired. I avoid Echo Ridge now like some men avoid funerals. I run the longer route even when it costs me time and money. Once, in a protective moment of bravado, I slowed at the old turnoff and watched the drifted tree line. The lamplight of my cab painted the snow in familiar gold. But the crossroads where the man had stood held only silence and the slow, patient dark. It felt blessed and empty both. Driving taught me a lot. How to read a load, how to coax a tired engine, how to listen when the night speaks. It also taught me the importance of being honest. With fear, we don't leave the road because we're cowards. We leave because we value the life waiting at the other end of the route. The hitchhiker in the parka lives somewhere between those lessons. He's a story we tell at rest stops when the coffee is cheap and the heaters are loud. He's a nameless hand that steadies you when the world tilted once and you found yourself without a co-driver. Sometimes faith is practical. Sometimes it's a polite lie that keeps you making better choices when exhaustion presses like a thumb. I don't know if the man was a ghost in a story or a stranger with a lamp to light the way. What I know is this: on some roads, kindness is risky, and caution is charity. I didn't bring him to my house. I didn't ask for his number. I let him vanish. That choice saved a lot of questions I'd rather not have to answer. Respect the limits the road sets, listen to people who know its secrets, and remember that sometimes survival is found in the simplest act, following a quiet warning rather than arguing with the storm. I started driving nights because it paid the bills and because the kitchen at my parents' house never felt warm anymore. My sister's treatments didn't wait for daylight, and the restaurant owner liked hiring someone who could take odd runs and never complain. I was 27 when I learned how quickly the road can rearrange a person. Responsibility puts a weight in your chest that makes the dark feel heavier. I took the winter shifts because I had to, because the tips helped, and because being out on a lonely road at midnight made the bills seem a smaller thing than the quiet back home. That night in December, with snow sideways and the van's heater coughing like an old man, I told myself it was one last run. That's what I always said when I took a job I didn't want. One last run, and I'll be done. I said it that night as I signed for a stack of containers bound for an address in the Pinelands, and I said it again when my boss handed me the keys with a smile that made his breath show in the cold. By the time I found Timberwolf Road, the trees were swallowing the sky. The driveway was long enough to give the van a slow, hollow feeling as I rolled over the ruts, and the house sat back from the road like it didn't want to be seen. No porch light, no glow in the windows, just dark glass and a doorway that breathed out cold. I like to think I had a sixth sense that should have nudged me to leave, but hunger for a paycheck and the habit of being responsible narrowed my thinking to a button on the van and a piece of paper that said 47 Timberwolf. I parked under the single reflector and grabbed the bags. The snow sank under my boots. When I pressed the bell, I heard the echo swallowed by wood and wind. No answer. I knocked on the door, louder this time, and thought maybe I'd just catch someone asleep. The porch light stayed dark. Then the door cracked, and a beam of flashlight stabbed into my face so sharp I had to blink. The guy at the doorway was young, maybe my age, head tucked into an oversized jacket that made him look small. He held the beam steady like he was testing me. "Just put it inside," he said flatly. His voice went nowhere. It was like a line from an instruction manual. He'd left the door ajar enough for me to see the living room. Furniture under sheets, dust on the floor, an air of a place that had been abandoned halfway through. The light showed me more. A table with a ring where a cup had once sat, a lamp without a bulb, corners white with settled neglect. It didn't look lived in. It looked staged to look as if no one lived there anymore. My gut did a small, hard flip. "Sir, I need a signature," I said, because that's what the job was. "Document the drop, get paid, drive away." He stepped closer until his flashlight painted my chest. "Put the food inside." He repeated it like an order, and the more he said it, the thinner his voice sounded. I set the bag down on the step and tried to laugh it off. "Listen, I can't company policy." It felt absurd to argue policy in the cold with a stranger who smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and antiseptic. He didn't blink. Instead, he opened the door wider, and the porch swallowed him. For a heartbeat, I saw movement behind him, a dim shape like a person passing the far window, more than one shadow sliding across the draped sofa. My skin tightened. I told myself to leave the bag on the step and go. That's what any decent person would do. But when I turned a second time, his face had gone rigid. Not right eyes too blank, smile too slow. Something in his voice shifted from insistence to command. "Come inside," he said. "You're not listening." That phrase, simple, stupid, cut through me like a hand across glass. Without thinking, I grabbed the bag, turned, and sprinted. My boots skidded on ice, the snow spitting up behind me like a living thing. The van was there and the lock clicked under my fingers with an exaggerated calm. I would have left if not for the sound behind me, footsteps running the length of the drive, heavy, like someone who'd been standing a long time and suddenly wanted a thing they'd been waiting for. I floored it out of there, fishtailing down the lane until the pines blurred and the world narrowed to taillights and my breath fogging the windshield. In the cold light of morning, I called the restaurant, breathless, and my boss gave me a look like I was playing a joke. "Old houses," he said. "People in the woods are weird." He told me not to worry. He said the address appeared on the app as valid and that sometimes people left odd instructions. I started to explain about the figure, the flashlight, the voices, the way the interior looked like a set. He shrugged and shifted the subject. I want to say he believed me less than I believed myself. I checked the address later because curiosity sits loud beside fear when your hands are still shaking. County records said the house had been vacant for over a year, utilities cut, last sale months before my delivery. Nobody lived there. That made the whole thing worse. Why was a young man at the door of an empty house telling me to come in? For a few nights after, I couldn't sleep. The van's heater sounded like someone talking in the room above me. I saw that flashlight beam when the snow fell. When a friend at the kitchen told me about a rumored squatters' camp, I felt relief that was almost foolish. Maybe that's all it was. Some kids with nowhere warm to be and a habit of opening an old house for shelter. That explanation fit easily into the part of my head that wanted the world to be fair, to be straightforward. But there were details that nagged, the way the man repeated his line. "You're not listening," like a phrase someone repeated to themselves before they could act, the way the shapes inside moved with a slicked-down purpose, and the way my boss closed down the topic like he was folding a map closed over a place he didn't want drivers to see. I quit that part-time run a week later. Saying no had cost me tips and a little extra cash, but it felt necessary the way stepping away from a cliff felt necessary if you wanted to live. Walking out of the kitchen, the owner gave me a look like he might change his mind and call me back. He didn't. My sister's treatments kept happening without regard for my choices. Bills still needed paying, and I took other runs, safer ones with busy strip malls and lights that stayed on all night. But the memory of that porch stayed in the back of my head like a bruised dull, impossible to ignore. The flashlight beam, the command, the furniture under sheets. Each image returned when the storm hit the coast and the roads went quiet. Sometimes people in the yard would tell stories about houses set up like traps, baited lights, a voice at the door, the desperate kindness of a delivery driver walking inside where no one should be. They spoke in low tones over coffee, glancing at the windows as if expecting something to appear there. The stories were warnings dressed as conversation, how easily a routine can be weaponized when the night is quiet and someone's watching. I don't know what happened behind that closed door. Maybe it was squatters, maybe criminals, maybe something worse that wields a human voice to get what it wants. What I know for sure is the way the sentence, "You're not listening," has lodged itself into my chest. Some phrases have teeth. They stay with you and come out sharp when you talk in the dark. The road asks things of you, often kindness, and sometimes people will use kindness to make you the thing they want. Being responsible doesn't mean being reckless. There are times to help and times to drive away. When the light cuts your face and a voice sounds flat, it's okay to choose safety. Your sister's next treatment is not worth the risk of being the person who didn't listen. That night taught me to be responsible for more than other people's expectations. It taught me to be responsible for my own life. I've been behind a wheel longer than I care to count, long enough that the road's memory sometimes feels like my own. Grease under my nails from a Detroit garage, the copper taste of panic from a mugging in Pittsburgh, the dull shock of a tire iron against my ribs in Dayton. Those things stack up. You grow hard and careful in this business. Night shifts teach you which lots to avoid, which docks close early, which alleys have men with hands that want other people's wallets. I learned to read a city the way some men read a map, by the way its corners held danger, and the way its lights betrayed it. Kedzie was that kind of place, a stretch you heard about over coffee and CB static. The kind of strip where even the streetlights seemed to lean away from you. I never went down there unless I had to. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who'd carry the image of a man dying on ice like a picture in his head for months. The night it happened, I'd covered a double because Mike called in sick, and nobody else could take his run. That's the thing about this job, you say yes, and your paycheck shows up. You say no, and the next month's rent looks like a question mark. The weather was a slow, relentless sleet that pinpricked the windshield and made the streetlights smear. By 2 a.m, the factories were hulks of glass and sheet metal, their docks black holes where a man could disappear without anyone noticing. I was almost done. One more drop and I could be home. I remember thinking, as the wipers made that same tired scrape, that tonight would be boring and ordinary in the nicest possible way. I got stuck at the red like everyone else. 2 sedans pulled up beside me, engines idling with the kind of arrogance you hear from cars that think they own the night. The drivers were shouting at each other, faces I couldn't read from the cab. I muttered, let it go, and kept my hands on the wheel. Then the driver of the first car jumped out, stomping over like someone who'd rehearsed violence in his head for a long time. The second car's passenger window rolled down slow, like something in a movie. I watched the 2 men lean toward each other, shoulders tight with anger. A flash of metal, it was over in a breath. 2 pops rang out, small and obscene against the sleet. The man who'd charged hit the pavement with a sound that wasn't human. Blood spread fast, a dark stain widening on the ice. Horns blared, people screamed. Instinct did funny things. Mine told me to stay locked in the truck, to let the scene unfold like a bad show I didn't want to be part of. Instead, I shouldered the door open and stepped onto the street. 2 other drivers had the same idea. We moved like men with rough hands and softer hearts, because some things in a city hit you where you keep your humanity. The victim's breath came in a big wet sound and then stopped. We called 911. We tried to help, and the shooter peeled away in the gray like he'd been waiting for a window. I couldn't catch the plate. I couldn't catch that man's name. I could only hold a stranger's fading life in my hands and feel the helplessness like a weight. The police were efficient in that way. Departments are after something ugly happens in a place where ugly is part of the furniture. They asked questions. They took statements. They chalked the corners of possibility. Rolling disputes, one officer said, as if that phrase could hold the terror. Arguments that erupt into violence, he called it. The kind of thing where men settle scores in traffic and then vanish. I told them what I'd seen. I told them how the sleet sounded against the glass like a million small bullets, and how his eyes were wide as if surprised by his own end. Then I finished the delivery like a man trying to stitch himself back together, one task at a time. Sleep doesn't come easy after a night like that. For a while I slept with the TV on low, the kind that talks about weather and sports instead of anything useful. When I did drift, I woke up with my sheets soaked in sweat, certain I'd heard a car backfire and felt fingers tightening on the wheel. My therapist, yeah, I went to one because you don't bury something like that and expect it to stay down, said the brain stores trauma in places you don't visit until a trigger opens the drawer. For me, sleet is the trigger. A cup hitting the floor, a car door slamming. Even the sound of tires on a wet road set my teeth to grind. Long-haul drivers learn to lock down feelings to keep functioning, but trauma has a way of leaking. I started to avoid Kedzie by choice, not just caution. I drove around the district even if detours cost time and money. There are places in this life where you pay a premium for peace of mind. Call it cowardice if you like, but I call it being smart. The thing that haunts me most is how ordinary the whole sequence was. I'd been down that intersection a dozen times without incident. The city can seem like a map of safe streets and dangerous zones until a single night reassigns meaning. That man on the ice could have been me, or my brother, or any of the guys we see in the yard swapping soft talk over lukewarm coffee. It was a reminder that violence is sometimes a coin flip, and location is only one face of the die. Friends said I should be grateful I wasn't shot, that I had a scar in my mind but not on my skin. That helps in some quiet places, but it doesn't stop the images. I replay the man's expression, surprise, and a slow understanding like a photograph that won't stop developing. Sometimes I catch myself counting seconds at red lights, measuring the distance to the next safe lot, watching other drivers' hands like they hold a warning. My therapist explained how normal my reactions were. He gave me exercises to calm the body's alarm system, deep breaths, grounding phrases, naming colors in a room to drag the mind away from the spiral. They work sometimes. Most of the time, I'm just a man who drives a truck and carries a late-night scene like luggage. There are nights when I pull into a dock and see a young driver with the same deer light in his eyes I had when I started, and it makes me want to tell him the ugly truth that the road keeps you in line with danger and chance, that you can be careful and still be unlucky. But what would I tell him? Don't take that route? Don't go outside at all? The balance we strike in this life is a strange one, between earning a living and not being reckless with the only life you have. I learned to be honest about fear without letting it make my decisions for me. I learned to say no to extra shifts when my head felt raw. I worked on my patience with the things I could control. My speed, my rest breaks, who I let drive with me. Months turned into a year and the wound got less raw, but the scar remained. Spring came and melted the sleet into puddles, and the city brought new sounds, kids laughing, lawn mowers, the low hum of a life that resumed. Yet sometimes, on a wet morning, a truck backfires and my heart jumps. I take a deep breath and remind myself I survived. I did what anyone would do. I helped where I could, and then I put my life back together the best way I knew how. By driving, by going home, by sitting next to the heater with my hands cupped around a mug and telling myself the world still holds ordinary evenings, sometimes paying attention to the small decisions that matter. We can't control everything that happens on the road, but we can control how we prepare for it, how we ask for help, and how we take care of ourselves afterward. Respect the work, respect the danger, but most of all, respect the fact that your mind needs tending when it collects hard things. Some streets remember what happened on them. The best you can do is listen, learn, and choose the routes that keep you whole. Moral: facing trauma doesn't mean bulldozing through it alone. Get help, set boundaries, and protect the life you're driving toward.